The defendant and attorneys of record are present. Mr. Brown, the state may call its next witness.
Judge, our final witness is Dr. Heather Garvin. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll swear you in, okay? Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. And if you'd make your way over there and be seated, please.
Watch your step. Ready? Okay. Dr. Garvin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your name for the record?
It's Heather Garvin.
And how are you employed?
I am an associate professor of anatomy at Des Moines University, and through the university, I also have a contract with the state of Iowa as a forensic anthropology consultant, given that I'm a board certified forensic anthropologist.
We're just going to request you speak a little bit slower.
No problem.
Yeah. So how long have you been employed as a forensic anthropologist?
So I started casework in 2005 as a graduate student at Mercyhurst College and been involved with it ever since. Slower still?
No.
Sorry.
Okay.
As of 2017 is when I became board certified as a forensic anthropologist.
Okay. Can you please just briefly outline your basic educational training?
So I have undergraduate degrees in anthropology and zoology from the University of Florida. I have a master's degree in biological and forensic anthropology from Mercyhurst College. And I have a PhD in functional anatomy and evolution from Johns Hopkins University, and then board certified through the American Board of Forensic Anthropology.
Okay. And your teaching duties, where are they at?
At Des Moines University, I teach anatomy.
Okay. And how long have you been teaching at Des Moines University?
Since July 2017.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 93, if I may approach.
You may. Go ahead.
Dr. Garvin, we've already admitted State's Exhibit 93, but can you please tell us what State's Exhibit 93 is?
This is my CV.
Okay, and what does it summarize?
It summarizes my education, my publications, my grants, pretty much my academic career.
Okay. All right, thank you. You can just set that up there. You indicated that you were board certified as a forensic anthropologist.
That is correct.
What does that entail exactly to become board certified?
So the only certifying body in the U.S. is the American Board of Forensic Anthropology. You have to obtain a PhD in anthropology or a related field. And then when I became board certified, you had to wait 3 years post-PhD to apply to sit for the board exam. That application to sit for the board exam, you had to submit letters of recommendation, training logs, and examples of case reports for them to review. If they determined that you were eligible to sit for the board exam, there is a practical exam and a written multiple choice exam that you must pass with 80% or above to become board certified.
Okay, you went through that entire process to become board certified as a forensic anthropologist, is that correct?
Correct.
Right. How many other forensic anthropologists are in the United States?
There's a little over 100, maybe about 102 active board certified forensic anthropologists in the U.S.
So that type of specialty in comparison to other specialties is fairly rare?
Correct.
All right. What types of things can a forensic anthropologist assist with whenever a body is located and there are determinations that need to be made about what happened?
So forensic anthropologists are experts in skeletal anatomy. So what we do is we typically look at the bones, we're going to assess them, inventory them, and then reveal to the medical examiner any kind of evidence we can, either about the identity of the individual, if it's an unknown decedent, or the circumstances around their death.
Have you consulted with the Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office in your capacity as a forensic anthropologist?
I have.
And do you know approximately how many occasions you've been requested to assist?
It's not specific to the Iowa State Medical Examiners, but since I've moved to Iowa, I've had 127 cases.
And did you do this type of work, forensic anthropology, prior to moving to the state of Iowa?
Yes, from 2012 to 2017, I was an assistant professor in the Applied Forensic Sciences Department at Mercyhurst University, where I supervised forensic anthropology casework and trained undergraduates and graduate students in forensic anthropology.
Okay. And where is Mercyhurst?
Erie, Pennsylvania.
And can you, maybe you've already provided some explanation here, but what exactly is forensic anthropology and how does it assist in arriving at a cause and manner of death for any particular person?
So by definition, forensic anthropology is the application of biological anthropology to medical legal scenarios. So forensic anthropologists apply specialized knowledge about human skeletal anatomy to provide information to the medical examiner or the coroner, either about the identity or their circumstances around the death. Forensic anthropologists themselves do not determine cause or manner of death, but we're providing more evidence to the medical examiner to help them in their determination.
Okay. Are you familiar with Dr. Dennis Klein?
I am.
And are you familiar with his staff at the Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office?
I am.
Have you worked with each of them, all four of them, on cases over the years?
Since July 2017.
All right. So only, I say over the years, I make it sound longer, but it's actually about the last 3 to 3.5 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. All right, Dr. Garvin, were you asked to assist in examining the body of Mollie Tibbetts?
I was.
When were you called in to help review on this case?
So I received a call from Dr. Klein on August 21st about the case, asking me to be there the following morning, August 22nd, for the beginning of the autopsy.
Okay. And what was your role, similar to what you've already described generally in this case as it has been in other cases?
Yes.
Okay. And were you present for the autopsy of Mollie Tibbetts?
I was present for a small portion of it at the beginning just to see the condition of the remains and also to create a plan with Dr. Klein about my subsequent analyses.
And is there anything that has to be done to prepare the bones that are recovered from any particular person that has been autopsied?
Yes, so as a forensic anthropologist, I'm interested in the bones themselves, not the soft tissue. So after the medical examiner has completed their analyses of the soft tissue, we essentially place them in a heated water bath to remove the remaining soft tissue so that I can get a better view of the bones.
Okay.
It's called maceration.
Okay. And was that done in this case?
It was.
Is that a process that you do yourself?
I do not. The medical examiner's office does it for me.
Okay. And at some point, the bones of Mollie Tibbetts were prepared for your examination?
That is correct.
And where did you go to perform that exam?
So the following day, August 23rd, is when I initially started my examination of the remains, and all of it was done at the state medical examiner's office.
Okay. The entirety of your examination takes how long?
It depends on the case. I would say I spent at least 20 hours looking at the remains, and my reports are pretty extensive. I would say at least 10 to 20 hours writing and preparing the report.
All right. And if you find anything of any significance, do you photograph that for purposes to be used later?
That is correct.
All right. All right. I'm going to show you what's been previously introduced as State's Exhibit 75. It'll be on the screen right in front of you, hopefully. Okay. This, I will tell you that this photo was a bit tough to get on a screen. That's why it's all the way over to the left. But Exhibit 75 that you have there in front of you, what are we seeing here in 75? Well, yeah, in 75.
This is a photograph that was included in my forensic anthropology report, and what it's displaying is all of the skeletal remains, the bones, after processing, after the soft tissue has been removed, and it's in approximate anatomical position. So it's just displaying everything that I had to work with and to analyze.
Okay. In assessing the skeletal remains now of Mollie Tibbetts, was there any particular bone or structure that was missing?
I had a mostly complete skeleton. I believe I was missing one tooth, a hyoid bone, a very small bone that's in the neck, and 2 toe bones, but otherwise I had everything else.
Okay, and what's the explanation, if you have one, for why those, why the hyoid and the other bones would have been missing?
They probably were not recovered at the scene. They're very small. When bodies are exposed to the elements, you can get animals. There's lots of different environmental influences that can scatter remains.
All right, we'll run through your findings. We'll start with the head, okay? The next picture that we have is State's Exhibit 76. This is a similar picture that we've seen before that was utilized by Dr. Klein, but in State's Exhibit 76, what were you able to find?
So this is a photograph I took of the right side of the head, the cranium, and the arrow there is indicating a sharp force defect that I found on the skull. It's just in front and above the opening for the right ear.
And does this particular area that you have identified with the area, does it penetrate all the way through the skull?
Yes, it perforates through the skull, and after autopsy they did cut open the skull to look at the endocranial surfaces as well, and you could see that opening on the inside.
Okay, we'll look at the next exhibit, State's Exhibit 77. What does this represent?
So this is a close-up image of that defect on the right side of the head. It's in the same orientation. It's just closer to show the borders of that sharp force defect.
Okay. And what, as a forensic anthropologist, what did the borders of that defect tell you about the instrument that was used to inflict it?
So the very sharp borders to it are consistent with sharp force defect or sharp force trauma, something that was created with a beveled surface or a pointed surface where it cut through the bone. The particular triangular shape of this, where down towards the right side there's a more squared edge and a more pointed edge towards the other, suggests that it was likely a single-edged blade, where the spine, the non-cutting edge, would be the squared part, and then the beveled cutting edge would be towards the point.
And the beveled cutting edge would be a little bit higher up in this photo, is that correct?
Correct, up and towards the left.
Okay. And whenever you looked at the interior of the skull, does this particular wound penetrate all the way through the bone?
Yes.
Can you tell, as a forensic anthropologist, how deep a knife would have been stabbed into this area of the skull?
No, I could not. I mean, it went through the few millimeters of bone that you have that's covering the brain there. I did not have any indication that it hit any other surfaces within the inside of the skull.
Okay. And at the time that you were able to observe the body of Mollie Tibbetts, before this process was done with the bones, what was the state of decomposition that you observed?
It was highly decomposed, mostly mummified tissue, some putrefied tissue underneath that mummification.
Okay, whenever you talk about mummification, what are you referring to?
It's the drying out of the tissues. I don't want to give another example, but the tissues dry out, they become hard, they're dehydrated.
All right. We'll move on to State's Exhibit number 78. This is a bit of a different picture we saw than whenever Dr. Klein testified. You've placed some arrows on State's Exhibit 78. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right, let's start on the left side of the photo. What do the arrows represent on the left side of the photo?
So overall in the photo, we have the two neck vertebrae, C4 and C5, sitting on top of one another as they do in the neck. And we're looking at the anterior, the frontal surface of that. Anatomically, there may have been a little bit more space between them because cartilage would sit between those bones. So the yellow and the orange and peach arrows over there are the right side of those neck vertebrae, and each arrow indicates a sharp force defect that I saw in the bone.
I'm sorry, just to make sure we're oriented correctly, the way that the bones are facing us here in State's Exhibit 78, it would be as if we're facing her face, Mollie's face. Would that be true?
True.
Okay, not her, the back of her neck.
Correct.
All right. And the three arrows that you're referring to, are those all separate defects to the bone?
So those 4 arrows are all separate defects to the bone, but they all align anatomically with one another and could have been created with a single impact.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So this could be consistent with a single impact of a sharp force blade?
Correct.
All right. Is it also consistent with multiple stab wounds to the neck?
All I can say is a minimum of 1.
Okay. Then on the right side, there's a blue arrow on State's Exhibit 78. Do you see that?
I do.
And what does that area represent?
So that's a sharp force defect that I have to the left side of the vertebrae there. And in another view, there's a second one on the C4, the top vertebrae right there, that will align with it as well.
Okay. Do the wounds that you see associated with the blue arrow on the right and the other colored arrows on the left, could those have been caused by one blow or one stab of the knife?
No, they don't go all the way through the vertebrae.
So there's at least 2 injuries that we see here then in State's Exhibit 78. Is that true?
Correct. A minimum of 1 to the right and the minimum of 1 to the left side of the neck.
All right. Can you tell by looking at the injuries here to the bones whether or not it was a slashing type motion that would have caused these injuries or some other type of motion that would have caused them?
Well, on the ones to the right, if you look at how far in, how deep in they would go into the bone, it's about 2.5 centimeters. So in my opinion, that wouldn't be consistent with a shallow slashing.
Okay. And then the arrow on that represents the injury on the right, we're saying right side of the picture, that's the left side of the neck, correct?
Correct.
Would that be consistent with the same type of motion that you just indicated?
That one's very shallow. It could be caused either way, either by a perpendicular impact of the blade or a side impact of the blade.
Okay. We'll move on to State's Exhibit 79. What is State's Exhibit 79?
So in this picture here, that top vertebra, that C4, I've taken it and just flipped it over to better show those defects because they're hard to illustrate in the photographs. So the same color arrows correspond to the previous picture. So the yellow and orange is the right side, the green is the left side, and the arrows indicate sharp force defects that I have on that vertebra.
Okay, so the orange and yellow arrows are the right side of the neck, correct?
Correct.
And the green is the left side of the neck.
Correct.
Same injuries that we saw before in State's Exhibit 78, just to make sure we're clear.
The green is one that you couldn't see in the previous photo, but it aligns with that blue arrow, the defect we saw on the bottom vertebra, the C5 vertebra, in that previous photo.
Anything else of significance with Exhibit 79 that we haven't already discussed?
No.
All right, we'll move on to the next photo, Exhibit number 80. Again, what are we looking at here with Exhibit 80?
So these are the sharp force defects to the left side of the vertebrae there, same colored arrows as in the previous photographs. So I have that C4 and C5 vertebra sitting against one another, and you can see the linear defects line up with one another.
The linear defects you're referring to are the ones that are represented by the blue arrow and the green arrow?
Correct.
Right. And is this a separate injury than what we've seen before in previous photos?
No, it's just a different view showing that they align with one another.
Anything else of significance here to Exhibit 80?
No.
All right, we'll move on to Exhibit 81. All right, so before we get into Exhibit 81, did you do some examination with regard to the ribs, to the rib bones of Mollie Tibbetts?
So I examined all of the bones of Mollie Tibbetts, all of the surfaces, both with my eyes and under a stereoscopic microscope. Yes, that did include the ribs.
Okay, and what is Exhibit 81 is a cluster of 5 separate photos, would you agree with me?
Correct.
And what do those 5 separate photos that make up Exhibit 81 represent?
So this is another figure from my report that I gave to the medical examiner, and they're showing different views of the defects that I had on the right 6th rib, sharp force defects.
Okay. So do each of the photos, we'll start with the top left corner. First of all, what is that?
So the top left corner, the one labeled A, is the right 6th rib, so that you can see the entire rib there. And the green arrow, it's hard to see right there, but those green arrows are where I have the sharp force defects on the rib. It's kind of anterior lateral for the right 6th rib. And then the remaining photographs are just closer views and different angles and different lighting of those defects on the rib.
Okay. Moving to the right, we have a closer photo of what those defects are, is that right?
That is correct, and you can see that the defects come down to a point. They're V-shaped at the floor, which is consistent with a knife.
Okay. And I see 3 different areas of defect in the bone in the picture on the top right. Would you agree?
Correct. In that one, you can see the 3 deeper ones. There are more shallow ones that are better represented in the other photos.
Okay. And moving down to the next photo, is that one of those photos you're referring to that is in the middle on the left?
Correct. In B there, it's a top-down view. So you can see the 3 deeper sharp force defects, but you can also see just beyond them a couple shallow linear defects as well.
Okay. And then moving below that photo, there's a multiple arrows that show an area on the same rib bone. Was that true?
That is correct. The green...
Yeah, I'm sorry. What do those represent?
Those are even more superficial linear scratches in the bone. I was going to mention that the green arrow in each of these figures is the same defect for orientation.
Okay. And then moving to the last photo in Exhibit 81, the last part of it, does that show the same area that we're looking at in the previous photographs?
Yes, it does.
All right, looking at those pictures in the 6th rib, what side of the body again was this from?
This is the right.
The right side. Can you tell how many different times a knife would have been stabbed into Mollie that would have caused the injuries that we see here?
Given the close proximity of all of these defects, I said that it is a minimum of 1 impact to that right 6th rib area.
Could it be more than 1?
It's a minimum of 1.
Okay. All right. Anything else of significance with State's Exhibit 81?
No.
All right. State's Exhibit 82. This is the same. Is this the same left? Oh, I'm sorry. This is a different rib. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. My bad. Which rib are we dealing, or are we looking at here in State's Exhibit number 82?
So now we've moved to the left 6th rib.
Okay. This is directly across from the other rib that we were looking at. Would that be accurate?
The rib lies directly across from it, yes.
Okay. This is a constellation of 4 different photos, A, B, C, and D. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's within State's Exhibit 82?
Correct.
All right. On the top left quadrant, what does that photo show?
So that top left quadrant A is an overview of that entire rib. And again, I've demarcated with arrows where the sharp force defects are on that rib. They're a little bit more lateral. On the right side, it was anterior lateral. On the left side, a little bit more lateral on the side.
Okay. Moving to the right of that photo, what do we see in that picture?
So this is a closer view of those sharp force defects. Again, throughout all of these pictures, the green arrow indicates the same defect, the yellow arrow, the same defect for orientation.
Okay, and then collectively, the 2 pictures below that show what?
They're even closer views. We have 1 linear defect where that green arrow is, and then between that green and the yellow arrow, there's essentially a shaved off portion of that top part of the rib.
Okay. Whenever I look at this, Dr. Garvin, it appears to me to be more of a scraping type injury rather than the notches that we saw in the previous photos. Would you agree?
I would agree.
What is your explanation for that in looking at this particular part of the rib?
It can just be a difference in the orientation that the blade impacted the rib. For example, if you had a more side orientation, it could shave off that top part of the bone versus creating that V-shaped defect that we saw in some of the other linear ones.
Okay. Anything else of significance that we see here in State's Exhibit number 82?
No.
All right. I think we've got 2 more ribs to look at.
Yes.
All right. So State's Exhibit number 83. That's on the screen. Which particular rib are we looking at in State's Exhibit 83?
So this is the left 7th rib.
Okay. So just below the 6th rib, correct?
That is correct.
All right. This looks to be a different type of impact. Would you agree?
Yeah, so this is still a sharp force defect. Here it is on the external surface, the outer surface of the rib, where the other views were on the top part of the rib. And it's just a linear notch, a perpendicular impact, and then a trailing scratch from that.
Okay. What would that be consistent with as far as any type of weapon that would have been used to inflict this type of injury we see in Exhibit 83?
Any kind of knife or blade.
It appears to me that in the 2 photos to the right side of State's Exhibit 83 that the bone appears cracked. Would that be true? There appear to be cracks in the bone?
I'm not sure where you're referring to.
Okay, well, the close picture that we have here on the bottom right, there appears to be some sort of linear mark that cuts across the bone. Do you see that?
The oblique one
Yes.
running down, that's a trailing scratch from the sharp force defect. So the sharp implement created a scratch against that surface.
So the photo that's on the bottom right corner of this State's Exhibit 83, we see what appears to be more of a reddish area in 2 different parts. Would you agree?
I'm not following.
Yep, that's okay. I may approach. You may. All right. I'll just point it out. This area here that I see on the bottom right photo, and this area here, do those represent anything that that is connected to any type of sharp force injury?
Well, they're incised bone, they're cut bone along that linear length. They don't tell me anything specific about the implement, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. And then there appears to be some sort of a cracking or mark on the bone here in the bottom right photo. Would you agree?
So that's all a linear cut. Connecting those 2 areas that you pointed out, that's a single linear defect in the bone.
So from this point down to this point is one, or this point is
Yes.
one linear defect, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else of significance with regard to State's Exhibit 83?
No.
State's Exhibit 84. There are 4 photos that make up State's Exhibit 84. Would you agree?
I agree.
All right, on the top left corner of this exhibit, what is that?
So that's an overall view of the left 8th rib.
Okay, and then the middle photo on the top is, what does that represent?
So the middle photo and all the others other than A there in the top left corner are close-ups of the defects that is located at that spot of the yellow arrow in A.
Okay. And then describe for us what the defects are in the bone that is here, that is the left 8th rib.
So again, we have defects consistent with sharp force trauma. In this case, it's almost as if some of the bone has been cut away or carved out from that impact.
And again, can you tell us with regard to this area of the 8th rib, how many different stabs of a sharp force or of a knife would have caused this type of injury?
This is a minimum of 1 impact to that left 8th rib.
Same as the others that you've seen?
Correct.
It's 1, could be more?
Correct.
Okay. Anything else here of a significance with State's Exhibit 84?
No.
And then lastly, Dr. Garvin, State's Exhibit 85 is on the screen, is that correct?
That is correct.
We've looked very closely at some of the injuries, or all the injuries, that you observed to the skeletal remains of Mollie Tibbetts. Is that true?
That is true.
What does Exhibit 85 then represent?
So this summarizes the various areas that I found those sharp force defects. Overall, I had a minimum of 7 impacts, 1 to that right side of the head, 1 to the right side of the neck, the C4, C5 vertebra, 1 to the left side of the C4, C5 vertebra. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Well, you would describe again, if you would, the injuries that you observed to the neck. The interpreter has to get it.
Sorry.
That's fine. Just summarize it for us one more time.
Okay, so besides the one to the head, on the right side of the neck at the C4 and the C5 vertebra, I have a minimum of 1 impact. I have a separate impact to the left side of the C4 and C5 vertebra in the neck. I have a sharp force impact to the right 6th rib, another impact to the left 6th rib, another one to the left 7th rib, and another one to the left 8th rib. So in total, a minimum of 7 impacts.
Okay. Did you examine any clothing that Mollie Tibbetts would have been wearing that would have corresponded to those types of injuries that you reviewed, or is that better left to Dr. Klein?
I did not. I'm only interested in the bones.
Okay. Have we fairly summarized all the injuries that you were able to observe in your examination of the skeletal remains of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
All right. Anything else with regard to injuries to her pelvic region, her leg, or thigh bone, shin bones, and feet? Anything else that you noticed or observed in your examination of her skeletal remains?
No, the only trauma I saw were the sharp force defects that we've discussed here.
Okay. And as far as cause and manner of death, that also is a medical examiner's area of expertise. Would that be true?
Correct. I can't speak to that.
All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Defense may cross-examine.
No questions.
Okay. Ma'am, thank you for being here. You're excused.
Thank you.
State of Iowa may call its next witness.
Your Honor, on behalf of the state of Iowa rests.
Okay, record should reflect the state of Iowa rests. Counsel, could I get you to approach, please? Members of the jury, with the state resting, we will be in recess until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Before I send you on your way for the day, I want to remind you of your admonition. Please do not be discussing the case with anyone. That needs to wait until your deliberations. Make sure you're not doing any type of independent research involving the case, and make sure you're not having any media exposure. Please leave your notebooks on your chairs, and our court attendant, Carrie, will hold them, collect them and hold them for the evening. And again, back here at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you. All right, we are outside the presence of the jury. They have been sent home for the day. The state has rested. Anything we need to address on the record here today?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense at this time would make a motion for judgment of acquittal pursuant to Iowa Rule of Criminal Procedure 2.19, subsection 8. That motion states that if after the close of the evidence, there is not enough evidence to submit the case to the jury in the light most favorable to the state, then a motion for judgment of acquittal should be granted. It is the defense's position that the state, even in the light most favorable to the state, has failed to prove the elements as laid out in murder in the first degree. Specifically, I would point out element number 4 of the instructions that the defendant acted willfully, deliberately, or premeditated with a specific intent to kill. In this case, the evidence in the light most favorable to the state submitted show that the defendant, that there was no sort of a following of Ms. Tibbetts or anything like that. That they didn't know each other. In the light most favorable to the state, and based on the defendant's statements at the police station, show no premeditation or specific intent to kill whatsoever. Specifically, the evidence elicited through the defendant's own statements is that he blacked out and doesn't remember what happened. As far as murder in the second degree, it is also our position that the state has not proven element number 3, which deals with the defendant acting with malice aforethought. Malice aforethought is defined as a fixed purpose or design to do some physical harm to another which exists before the act is committed. It does not have to exist for any particular length of time. In this case, in the light most favorable to the state, the only evidence is that there was some sort of a conversation between the defendant and Ms. Tibbetts where something happened. And at that time, Ms. Tibbetts allegedly threatened to call the police or something to that effect, and that after that, the defendant did not know what happened. And that is pursuant to the state's evidence in the light most favorable to the state, which is primarily the defendant's own statements at the police station. I would note also, pursuant to Iowa Rule of Criminal Procedure 2.21, subsection 4, that a confession of a defendant is not sufficient to warrant a conviction. I think the state's evidence is primarily the evidence elicited from the 11-hour interrogation of the defendant, and therefore the motion on behalf of the defense should be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fries. Go ahead, Carrie. All right, Mr. Brown, the state's response.
Judge, I do believe that Ms. Fries identifies the proper legal standard in that at this point. At the trial on a motion for judgment of acquittal, the state or the court is required to view the evidence in the light most favorable to the state to determine if there is a prima facie case to submit to the jury. It's our position that the evidence here is overwhelming concerning the guilt of the defendant on a first-degree murder charge. There is evidence of injury, there is evidence of identity, there is evidence of cause of death, there is evidence of his specific intent. All of this is tied back to the core part of the state's case, which relates to the video, which puts him in the area, the admissions that he makes to Pamela Romero, including the admission that he made leading the officers to the body of Mollie Tibbetts. So given all that information, the nature of the injuries, his statements, the blood that is found in his trunk of the Malibu, which he says he exclusively drove, looking at all of those, we have more than proved a prima facie case, and the motion for judgment of acquittal should be denied.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. The court has considered the evidence in the light most favorable to the state of Iowa, and for all of the reasons set forth by Mr. Brown, which the court adopts and incorporates, at this time the court finds that a prima facie case has been established by the state, and we will proceed, and the defense's motion for judgment of acquittal is hereby denied. Defense have anything else we need to take up on the record today?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Brown, anything else while we're on the record?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you everyone, and we'll close the record, and we'll be back at it tomorrow. Thank you.